Can dignity survive in the face of such humiliation? I never imagined my life would come to this point, standing under the dull glow of a flickering streetlight, my stomach hollow and my heart heavy, begging strangers for the scraps they no longer wanted. Once upon a time, I was like them, walking confidently through warm restaurants, laughing with friends, paying for meals without counting the bills in my wallet. But that was before everything collapsed, before death and debt swallowed my world and left me standing here in the cold, clutching my pride like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The air that night bit through my thin, worn-out jacket. It was late winter, the kind of night when the wind feels like knives slicing through your skin. My shoes, torn and frayed at the edges, let the freezing water of the pavement seep in, soaking my socks until every step stung like fire. My hands, rough and calloused from years of work, trembled not only from the cold, but from the weight of shame. I should have been home, reading my daughter a bedtime story, making her laugh with silly voices until her tiny hands pulled the blanket up to her chin and her eyes fluttered shut. Instead, she was lying in the dark, her stomach empty, and I was here, reduced to begging strangers for mercy. The restaurant I stood outside of glowed with golden light, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter spilling out each time the door swung open. Through the wide glass windows, I could see plates piled high with food, steaming meats, fresh bread, and desserts so rich they seemed unreal. Families and couples leaned close across polished wooden tables, their faces soft with joy, their bellies full. My own stomach growled at the sight, twisting painfully. But what hurt worse was the thought of my daughter back home, her little body curled up under a thin blanket, too tired to cry, too hungry to sleep. I forced myself to take a step closer, my heart hammering in my chest. Each time someone walked out of the restaurant, I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I felt the weight of every eye that glanced at me, the way they looked through me, as though I wasn't human at all, just another shadow on the sidewalk. My breath came out shaky, forming little clouds in the cold air. Finally, I whispered the words I had been dreading. "Excuse me, do you have any leftovers?" "Just a little. For my daughter." The man I asked was well-dressed, his coat lined with fur, his shoes polished to a shine. He stopped, looked me up and down, and the corner of his mouth twisted into a smirk. Then, with a laugh loud enough for his friends to hear, he said, "Leftovers? Get a job, loser." His words cut deeper than any knife. His friends chuckled, glancing at me with eyes that burned with judgment. They walked away, their laughter trailing behind them like poison in the air. I lowered my head, shame burning through me. My hands trembled harder now, not from the cold, but from the humiliation pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows so no one could see how far I had fallen. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't go home empty-handed again. A woman walked out next, her hands full of shopping bags. I forced myself to try again. "Please," I said softly, my voice breaking. "Do you have anything you don't need?" "Just a piece of bread?" She stopped, turned her head, and her eyes narrowed. She didn't say a word, but the way she looked at me, as if I were something dirty clinging to the bottom of her shoe, was enough. She pulled her bag closer to her chest and hurried away. One after another, I asked. One after another, they ignored me, mocked me, or shook their heads without even slowing their steps. Each rejection carved another wound in me, and yet I couldn't stop. I kept trying, because the face of my little girl haunted me. Her wide eyes, her small voice asking, "Daddy, do we have food tonight?" replayed in my mind until I thought I might collapse. I wanted to protect her from hunger, but hunger was a cruel enemy. It showed no mercy. The hours dragged on. The night grew colder. My legs ached from standing, my throat raw from whispering words that no one wanted to hear. My pride had already shattered into pieces, scattered on the icy pavement beneath my feet. But then came the moment that crushed what was left of me. I approached a group of young men, my voice barely audible. "Please, just a piece of bread." One of them laughed, pulled a half-eaten sandwich from his bag, and tossed it onto the ground in front of me. "There you go, beggar," he said with a sneer. His friends howled with laughter. I stared at the sandwich lying on the dirty pavement, the bread soaking in mud and melted snow. My stomach screamed for me to pick it up, but my soul screamed louder. I couldn't. Not like this. Not with them watching. My daughter deserved food, but she also deserved a father who still had some shred of dignity left. My knees nearly buckled as I turned away, the sound of their laughter chasing me down the street. My breath came in ragged gasps. For a moment, I thought I might break down completely, right there on the frozen pavement. And then, it happened. A voice, soft and clear, cut through the noise. "Daddy?" I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. And there she was, a little girl in a pastel dress, her silky hair tied with ribbons, her eyes wide and shining as she looked up at me. She reached for my hand with a smile, as if she had known me forever. And in that instant, the world around me stopped. Why would the daughter of a wealthy family mistake a beggar for her dad? For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The cold night, the gnawing hunger, the endless humiliation. Maybe it had all driven me to madness. But no, the voice was real. That small, sweet voice had pierced through the noise of the city, silencing the mocking laughter and the sneering words that had battered me for hours. I looked down, and there she was. A little girl stood in front of me, no older than 7, dressed in a pastel-colored dress that shimmered under the pale glow of the streetlight. A ribbon held her silky hair neatly in place, and polished shoes peeked out from beneath the hem of her frilled skirt. She looked like a doll brought to life, untouched by the dirt and struggle that stained the streets around her. And she was holding my hand, gripping it tightly, looking up at me with eyes so wide and innocent that my heart forgot to beat for a moment. "Daddy," she whispered again, her lips curling into the softest smile. My body stiffened. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. I didn't know her. I had never seen her before. And yet, there was something in the way she clung to me, as though she belonged here at my side, as though she had been searching for me all her life. People around us began to slow their steps, curiosity pulling them closer. I could hear the whispers ripple through the crowd. "Is she serious? That can't be her father. Look at his clothes. He's a beggar." Their voices stung, each word a reminder of how far I had fallen. But in that moment, their judgment didn't matter. What mattered was the small hand clutching mine, warm and steady, grounding me in a reality I didn't understand. My mind screamed at me to let go, to explain, to tell her she was mistaken. But my heart was drowning in a strange, unfamiliar warmth. It had been so long since anyone had called me that word. "Daddy." I opened my mouth, my voice trembling as I tried to speak. I think you've made a mistake." But before the words could even leave me, she shook her head with a certainty far too strong for a child her age. "No," she said firmly, her eyes glistening. "You're my daddy." I stumbled backward, almost losing my balance, my rough hands pulling away from her delicate grip. My mind raced, searching for answers. Who was she? Why was she saying this? Why did her eyes hold such conviction, as if she could see something no one else could? The crowd around us thickened. Strangers pointed, some smirking, some amused, others shaking their heads in disbelief. To them, this was entertainment, a wealthy child clinging to a poor beggar, calling him her father. Their eyes devoured the scene, their whispers growing louder, sharper, crueler. Maybe he tricked her. Maybe she's lost. Look at him. He doesn't belong near her. My chest tightened, my breath uneven. Shame, confusion, and an ache I couldn't name churned inside me all at once. I wanted to run, to escape their eyes, their judgment, their laughter. But when I looked down again, she was still there, her small fingers reaching for mine, her expression unshaken. "You're my daddy," she repeated softly, almost pleading now. I had no words left. My heart screamed with questions, but my lips refused to move. I wanted to tell her that I already had a daughter, that somewhere not far from here, my little girl was sleeping on an empty stomach. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't anyone's dream father. I was a broken man, shattered and discarded by the world. Yet when I looked into her eyes, something inside me cracked. For just a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like if she really were mine, if this little girl with the glowing smile and unshaken faith belonged to me. The whispers of the crowd grew louder, and I felt their eyes burn into my back like flames. A group of teenagers snickered openly, pulling out their phones to capture the scene. I heard one of them laugh. "This is going to blow up online." Rich girl finds her daddy in the gutter. The humiliation clawed at me, but still I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, frozen by the weight of the moment, by the warmth of her small hand in mine. And then, the sound of tires screeching cut through the chaos. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its polished surface gleaming under the streetlights. The crowd parted, their whispers hushed for a moment as the air thickened with a different kind of power. The car door swung open, and the first thing I saw was a polished leather shoe stepping onto the pavement. Then came the rest of him, tall, sharp, commanding. The man who stepped out radiated authority. His perfectly tailored suit clung to his broad shoulders, his tie pin glimmering in the light, his jawline clean and strong. His eyes, cold and piercing, swept across the scene until they landed on me. And when they did, my chest constricted with dread. The little girl gasped softly and tugged my hand again. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling this time, but still certain. I didn't know what terrified me more: the crowd, the man stepping out of the car, or the possibility that the world was about to change in a way I couldn't escape. Is this only a child's confusion? Or is there a hidden truth? The sound of the car door slamming shut was like thunder rolling through the cold night, silencing the crowd for a brief moment before the storm began. The man who emerged from the black luxury car walked with the heavy steps of someone accustomed to owning every space he entered. His presence alone shifted the air, and even those who had been mocking me only seconds earlier fell silent, their laughter fading into uneasy whispers. His suit was cut to perfection, the dark fabric glinting faintly under the glow of the streetlights, and his polished shoes tapped against the pavement with precision and authority. His gaze locked instantly on the little girl, still clinging to me, her small fingers wrapped tightly around my worn hand. For a heartbeat, I saw his expression falter, not from confusion, but from anger so sharp it could have cut through steel. His jaw tightened, and his eyes, cold and unforgiving, narrowed as he strode forward. The crowd instinctively moved aside, making way for him as if the pavement itself belonged to him. "Let her go," he snapped, his voice low but venomous, carrying the weight of command that made my knees tremble without meaning to. I froze, unable to move, my body torn between fear and the fragile warmth of the child's grip. She looked up at me with eyes filled with pleading, as if begging me not to abandon her, even though I didn't understand why she believed I was her father. My lips parted, but no words came out. The man closed the distance in 2 strides, his hand shooting out to seize the girl's arm. He yanked her toward him with such force that she stumbled, nearly falling, but she resisted, twisting back toward me. Tears welled up in her eyes as she screamed, "No!" "He's my real daddy." The words echoed in the night like a cruel joke, and the crowd erupted into a storm of gasps and murmurs. People craned their necks to watch, their phones lifted higher to record every second of the unfolding spectacle. For them, it was nothing more than entertainment, a drama between a wealthy man, a beggar, and an innocent child. But for me, those words were daggers, not because they hurt, but because they lit a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in years. A child's voice, filled with conviction, calling me father. It was something I had longed for and feared I would never hear again. The man's fury deepened at her defiance. His grip on her arm tightened as he towered over me, his sharp gaze piercing through the filth of my worn jacket and ragged shoes. "You dare touch my daughter?" he hissed, each word dripping with disgust. "You filthy parasite, how dare you stand here and pretend to be something you're not?" I wanted to speak, to tell him I had never claimed her, that she was the one who had come to me. But the words withered on my tongue. The crowd's eyes burned holes into my back, my shame drowning me before I could even open my mouth. My shoulders sagged, my fists clenched at my sides, and I felt myself shrink beneath his glare, as though I were nothing more than the dirt beneath his polished shoes. The girl sobbed, struggling against his hold, her small hands reaching for me even as he pulled her away. "Daddy," she cried again, her voice breaking, the desperation in it cutting me deeper than his insults ever could. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her back, to tell her she wasn't wrong. That for some reason I didn't understand, her heart had seen something in me that even I had forgotten. But my body wouldn't move. Fear and humiliation had rooted me to the spot, chaining me in silence while the world watched me crumble. The man turned to the crowd then, his voice rising. "Look at him," he spat, gesturing toward me. "This is what happens when filth dares to step out of the gutter. He disgusts me, and he should disgust all of you." His words rippled through the gathering, and I could feel their judgment grow heavier, their stares more condemning. Laughter returned in low, cruel waves, though now mixed with fear of the man who commanded it. I lowered my eyes to the pavement, unable to bear the sight of their mocking faces. My pride, already shattered, was crushed further under the weight of his words. It felt as though the night itself had turned against me, the darkness pressing in until I could hardly breathe. But even as I drowned in that sea of shame, the little girl's voice rose again, higher and more desperate. "He's my real daddy!" she screamed, her small body thrashing in his grip, her tears streaming down her face. The conviction in her voice silenced the crowd once more, the words hanging in the air like a challenge no one could ignore. The man froze. His hand still gripped her arm tightly, his posture still radiated fury, but something in his eyes shifted. He looked at me again, not with simple hatred, but with something sharper, something searching. His brows furrowed, his jaw slackened ever so slightly, and his stare drilled into me as though he were peeling back the layers of my broken exterior, trying to see what lay beneath. For the first time that night, I saw hesitation flicker across his face. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And in that hesitation, I felt a chill crawl down my spine, because in his narrowed eyes, I saw not only anger, but recognition. What destroyed his world? Was it fate or someone's betrayal? When I looked into the cold eyes of that powerful man dragging his daughter away, something inside me twisted, a painful reminder that I had not always been this way. There was a time when I walked the world with my head held high, when I had a home full of laughter, when my hands built more than they begged for. I wasn't always the shadow standing in dirty streets, trembling from shame and hunger. Once, I was a man people respected, a man my wife adored, a man my daughter looked at with pride. And though the years of suffering have tried to bury those memories beneath layers of pain, they still come back to me, sharp and vivid, whenever I close my eyes. I still remember the mornings when life felt simple. I would wake up to the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the small apartment we called home. My wife, her hair tied back loosely, would hum softly in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. The sound of her voice, gentle and unshaken, could calm even the stormiest of days. I would kiss her forehead as she turned to me with a smile that made the weight of the world disappear. A smile that reminded me I was exactly where I was meant to be. My little girl would come running, her tiny arms wrapping around my legs, her laughter filling the room like music. In those moments, I believed nothing could ever touch us. Nothing could ever take away what we had built. I was a hard-working man, proud of the calluses on my palms. My job was not glamorous, but it was honest. I worked long hours in a factory, the kind of place where machines roared louder than your own heartbeat, where sweat and grit stained every shirt you owned. It was tough, but I never complained, because when I came home at night and saw the faces of my wife and child, I felt rich in ways money could never measure. Every ache in my muscles was a reminder that I was doing my duty, that I was providing for them, that I was the man they could depend on. But life is cruel in its timing. Just when you believe you've found stability, it tests you with storms you never imagined facing. The day my wife fell ill, everything began to unravel. At first, it was small, a cough she brushed aside. Fatigue, she claimed, was nothing. But soon, her vibrant energy dimmed, her laughter faded into silence, and the sparkle in her eyes dulled with pain she tried to hide from me. We spent nights in hospitals, days chasing doctors, and every penny I earned slipped away faster than I could hold on to it. I worked extra shifts, borrowed from anyone who would listen, sold what little we had of value, all in the hope of saving her. But fate, or perhaps something darker, had already written its ending. The night she left us, the world stopped. I remember holding her hand, fragile and cold, as she whispered my name one last time. My little girl, too young to understand the permanence of death, cried herself to sleep on my lap while I sat there in the darkness, staring at the empty space where my wife's laughter used to live. I felt something in me die with her that night. It was not just love, it was my strength, my certainty, my belief that life could still be kind. After her death, the decline was slow but relentless. Grief made me weaker, and weakness made me a target. At work, my performance faltered. Mistakes piled up, my body refused to keep pace, and eventually the manager called me into his office. He did not look me in the eyes when he told me they had to let me go. I walked out of that factory with an empty toolbox, the sound of machines still roaring behind me, and the crushing realization that I had no way left to provide. From there, the fall was steady. The savings were gone, the debts grew, and soon the landlord's patience wore thin. We lost the apartment, the warm kitchen, the place that once echoed with laughter. My daughter and I moved into smaller, colder spaces, each one worse than the last. I tried everything, odd jobs, heavy labor, anything that promised a few coins. But the world doesn't forgive weakness, and it doesn't pause for grief. People looked at me differently now, no longer with respect, but with pity or disdain. Friends drifted away, neighbors closed their doors, and the circle of my life grew smaller until it was just me and my little girl, standing against a storm we could not control. Every day became a battle against hunger, against shame, against the crushing silence of a home that no longer felt alive. My daughter grew thinner, her laughter less frequent. I tried to keep her spirits alive with stories, with promises that tomorrow would be better, but deep down I feared I was lying to her, and that fear tore me apart more than hunger ever could. Years of struggle carved lines into my face, dulled the strength in my shoulders, and left me hollow. Poverty does not strike in one blow. It erodes you slowly, piece by piece, until you no longer recognize the man staring back at you in a cracked mirror. I had gone from a provider, a husband, a father, to a shadow wandering streets, begging for scraps. And yet, even in that shadow, fragments of the past lingered. I carried them in my memories, in the weight of my grief, and sometimes in the small objects I kept hidden, tokens of a life I had lost. One night, as I rummaged through the little box where I stored what remained of my old life, my fingers brushed against a folded photograph. I pulled it out carefully, the edges worn and frayed from years of being tucked away. As I unfolded it, my breath caught in my chest. There I was, younger, my smile wide, my wife by my side, her laughter frozen forever in that captured moment. But what made my hands tremble was not just her. Standing next to her in the photo, smiling as though she belonged in that moment too, was another woman, one I had seen before. I stared harder, my heart pounding, my mind refusing to believe. But there was no mistake. The face smiling back at me was the same woman I had glimpsed in the eyes of that furious CEO earlier that night. It was his wife, the very woman his daughter had been too young to remember, but whose features lived in her innocent face. My fingers shook violently, nearly dropping the photo. My pulse thundered in my ears as the truth began to uncoil inside me, a truth I had buried so deep I never thought it would surface again. And as I sat there, staring at that frozen moment of the past, one question consumed me. What cruel twist of fate had bound my life to his, and why was it resurfacing now, after so many years? Sometimes a child's heart sees the truth adults refuse to. After that night of humiliation, I thought I would never see her again. I told myself it had been a strange mistake, an accident that had nothing to do with me, a cruel trick of fate meant only to deepen my suffering. I wanted to push her out of my mind, to forget the way her small hand had clung to mine, to silence the echo of her voice calling me Daddy, as if she truly believed it. But no matter how hard I tried, the memory stayed, haunting me with its impossible warmth. I returned to my broken routine, wandering the streets, searching for work that never came, scavenging for scraps, and returning home to my daughter with a smile that grew more hollow each day. She didn't deserve the life we were living. And every night when I watched her fall asleep on that thin mattress, her face pale from hunger, I felt myself sink deeper into despair. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore, that life had already taken everything from me. But then she appeared again. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement when I felt a gentle tug at my sleeve. I turned sharply, expecting another stranger ready to mock me, but my heart stopped when I saw her. The same little girl, her ribbon-tied hair catching the sunlight, her pastel dress swaying as she breathed, stood before me with a smile so pure it broke something inside me. "You again?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She nodded firmly, her eyes wide with innocence. "I told you! You're my daddy." My knees almost gave way. I glanced around nervously, terrified that her father, that powerful man, might appear at any moment to drag her away and destroy what little pride I had left. But she was alone. No guards, no car, no watchful eyes following her. Just a child, bold enough to cross the line between her world and mine. "You shouldn't be here," I said softly, trying to steady my voice. "If your father finds out—" "He won't," she interrupted quickly, her small chin lifting with surprising determination. "I wanted to see you." Her words cut through me, simple yet powerful. No one in years had ever wanted to see me. Not for who I was, not for what little I had left. People came to use me, to pity me, to mock me, but never to choose me. And here she was, a child of wealth and privilege, insisting that she needed to be near me. She stepped closer, her tiny fingers brushing against my rough, scarred hand. "You're kind," she said, her voice steady despite her age. "When I'm with you, I feel safe. You feel like my real father." The world around me blurred. My eyes burned, tears threatening to fall, and I bit my lip to keep from breaking in front of her. How could she say that? How could she see something in me that even I had forgotten existed? My own daughter knew the man I had become. Broken, defeated, struggling to survive. Yet this little girl saw past the rags, past the shame, and into something I thought had died with my wife. I crouched down to her level, my voice low, desperate. "Why do you say that? You don't know me. I'm not the man you think I am." She shook her head, her curls bouncing with the movement. "I don't need to know everything. I can feel it. My heart tells me you're my daddy." Those words shattered me. My chest ached, my hands trembled, and I could no longer hold back the tears. I turned my face slightly, ashamed to let her see, but she reached up and gently touched my cheek with her small hand. The warmth of her touch was unbearable, like sunlight searing through years of cold darkness. "You don't understand," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I already have a daughter. She's waiting for me right now, hungry, wondering if her father will come home with food. I've failed her again and again. What kind of father do you think I could ever be for you?" Her eyes filled with tears too, but not of confusion, of empathy. "But you try," she said softly. "I can see it. You care. That's what makes you a daddy. Not money, not houses, not cars. Love. And you have that, her innocence pierced deeper than any cruelty ever could." I wanted to believe her, wanted to let her words heal the wounds that life had carved into me, but I was terrified. Terrified of what it meant, of what would happen if her father found out she was seeking me again, of the storm that would follow. Still, I couldn't turn her away. Not when her presence felt like the first breath of air after years of drowning. We sat together on the curb, the world rushing past us, and for a fleeting moment it felt like none of it mattered. Not the poverty, not the humiliation, not the walls that divided our worlds. She leaned her head against my arm, and I let her, too weak to deny myself the fragile comfort of that connection. Then she lifted her face, her voice dropping to a whisper, as though she was sharing a secret too heavy for her small shoulders. "I heard something," she said, her eyes darting nervously, though no one was near. "At home, they said my mommy loved someone else before she married my daddy." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat, the air suddenly too heavy to breathe. She leaned closer, her innocent voice trembling with the weight of the truth she carried. "They said she wanted to be with him. Not with my father." The world tilted, my pulse roaring in my ears, and the ground beneath me felt as though it had vanished. I stared at her, my hands shaking violently as a buried truth clawed its way back into the light. Will the truth heal wounds or destroy more lives? From the moment his daughter clung to me in front of that crowd, I knew the powerful man's pride had been wounded in a way he could never forgive. The look in his eyes was not only anger, it was suspicion, sharp and cutting, as though he had glimpsed a ghost he thought long buried. I could feel it even as he pulled her away from me, the weight of his stare pressing against my chest. A silent promise that this encounter would not be forgotten. Men like him did not let questions linger. They hunted them down until every answer was dragged into the light, no matter who was destroyed in the process. In the days that followed, I tried to push the memory away, to convince myself that the little girl's words and her father's rage would fade into nothing. I went about my miserable routine, scavenging for work, begging when I could not earn, returning each night to my daughter with whatever scraps I managed to find. But beneath every step I took, fear gnawed at me like a parasite. Each time I saw a man in a suit, each time I heard the distant hum of an expensive car engine, my heart lurched, certain they had come for me, and I was not wrong. The CEO, humiliated before strangers, was not a man who tolerated confusion. Rumors spread quickly in circles of power, whispers about the wealthy man whose daughter had mistaken a beggar for her father. He could not allow such disgrace to stain his name. So, he did what men like him always do. He ordered an investigation. My life, already fragile, was about to be ripped apart piece by piece, every scar I carried pried open until there was no place left to hide. I noticed them before they even tried to speak to me. Men in tailored suits loitering near the places I walked, their eyes cold and calculating. They pretended to read newspapers or sip coffee from paper cups, but I felt their gaze on me every time I passed. When I turned, they turned too. When I stopped, they stopped. The streets I once thought were crowded enough to lose myself and suddenly felt suffocating, as though every shadow was watching me, waiting to strip me bare. I tried to disappear, to keep to the alleys, to find corners where their eyes could not reach me. But poverty is the cruelest jailer. It does not allow you the luxury of hiding. You are always forced into the open, searching for food, begging for mercy, clinging to survival in places where dignity has no shelter. Each night, when I returned to my daughter, I forced a smile. But inside, I was unraveling. What if they followed me home? What if their questions reached her? She was all I had left, and the thought of her innocent face caught in their storm terrified me more than hunger ever could. Still, they came closer. One evening, a man approached me directly. His suit was flawless, his shoes shining despite the muddy pavement. He smiled, but it was not kindness. It was the kind of smile that stripped you down without a word. "You're difficult to track," he said smoothly, his voice calm, calculated. "But we always find what we're looking for." I said nothing. My mouth was dry, my body frozen. He handed me a card, the weight of it heavier than any coin. "If you know what's good for you, you'll tell us everything." It's easier that way. I threw the card onto the street the moment he left, but the fear clung to me like smoke. That night, I couldn't sleep. My daughter lay beside me, her small breaths steady, her tiny hand resting on my arm. I stared at the cracked ceiling, my mind racing. How much would they uncover? How much of my past had I truly buried? And worst of all, what would happen if they unearthed the truth I had tried so desperately to forget? Because buried in my memories was a face I could not escape, the face of the CEO's late wife. I remembered her laughter from years ago, before the world had broken me. She had been more than just a fleeting part of my past. She had been someone who mattered, someone who once stood close enough to see me not as a beggar, not as a failure, but as a man worth loving. That truth, if revealed, would shatter everything. It would destroy what fragile walls I had left to protect myself, and it would ignite a fury in the CEO that I might never survive. Days passed, and the walls closed in further. Men followed me openly now, asking questions to anyone who might have known me. Old neighbors, former co-workers, even people who had once shared bread with me in the darkest of nights, all were pressed for answers. My past, though covered in dust and sorrow, was being dragged out into the open, and with each fragment they uncovered, the noose around my neck tightened. One night I overheard two of them speaking as I crouched in the shadows, too afraid to move. Their voices were low, but the words reached me clear as a knife. "We found something," one said. "A photograph. The beggar isn't just some stranger. He was connected to her. My blood froze. I didn't need them to say her name. I already knew. They had uncovered the link, the one truth I had prayed would never resurface. They had seen the photo of me and her together, smiling as if the world belonged to us. And in that moment, I understood. The storm had only just begun. Was the child's instinct right all along? The truth has a way of arriving like a storm. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, whispering through cracks, hinting at its presence until you can no longer deny it. Other times, it crashes down without warning, ripping apart everything in its path. For him, the man who lived in marble halls, who ruled his world with wealth and authority, the truth came in the second way. Brutal, unforgiving, impossible to turn away from. And it was a truth that bound his life to mine in a way neither of us could escape. I wasn't there when they delivered it to him, but I've imagined that moment countless times. He must have been in his grand office, seated behind a desk carved from polished wood, the kind that gleams under the glow of city lights streaming through glass walls. His men would have entered quietly, their faces carefully blank, carrying the evidence that would stain his pride forever. Perhaps they hesitated before handing it over, because they knew that once he saw it, the world would shift, and no one in his household would be safe from the storm that followed. It was a photograph. Simple. Faded at the edges. Ordinary to anyone else. But to him it must have felt like a blade pressed against his throat, because in that captured moment of the past, there was me. Younger, smiling, my arm close to a woman whose beauty was undeniable. Her face, soft and radiant, was the same face his daughter had inherited, the same woman he had buried as his late wife, the same woman his daughter still whispered about in the dark. And the way she leaned toward me in that frozen memory, the light in her eyes as they met mine, said more than words ever could. It told a story of a love that had existed long before him, a bond he had never truly owned. I don't know if he gasped or if silence consumed him, but I know his pride bled that night. For men like him, betrayal is not just personal. It is an insult to the empire they believe they have built. He must have clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, his jaw tightening as the reality struck deeper with every passing second. His wife, the woman he had claimed as his own, had once belonged to another. And that other was me, the man he now despised, the beggar his daughter clung to in defiance of his power. His anger spread like wildfire, searing through every corner of his home. His daughter, once free to wander, once bold enough to seek me out, suddenly found herself surrounded by locked doors and watchful eyes. Guards shadowed her steps. Her every move was scrutinized. He forbade her even to speak my name, silenced her questions with stern commands, suffocated her innocence with rules born not of protection, but of fear. Because deep down, he knew the same thing I did, that children feel truths adults spend lifetimes denying. And his daughter had already sensed the connection he wanted so desperately to erase. I heard whispers of her resistance. Servants murmured that she had stopped eating. At times, her plate left untouched as tears welled in her eyes. They said she cried for me in the quiet hours, insisting she wanted to see her real daddy. Her father's fury grew with every act of defiance, his grip tightening like iron, but still she resisted in her small, stubborn ways. It was a battle of innocence against authority, of truth against pride. And though she was only a child, she was braver than most adults I had ever known. From my place in the shadows, I felt her absence like a wound. Days stretched into weeks, and not once did I hear her voice calling for me. Not once did I see her small figure running toward me with outstretched hands. The streets became emptier, the nights colder. Even my daughter noticed the difference in me, asking why I stared at the door as though waiting for someone who would never arrive. I had no answer for her. How could I explain that another little girl, one not born to my blood but drawn to me by something deeper, had awakened a part of me I thought had died, only to be ripped away again by her father's iron will? Meanwhile, his anger festered. Shock turned into denial, denial into fury, fury into obsession. He could not forgive the past, and he certainly could not forgive me for being part of it. To him, I was not simply a beggar. I was a reminder that his perfect world had been built on a foundation cracked long before he ever stepped into it. Every time he looked at his daughter, he must have seen her mother's face. And every time he saw her mother's face, he must have thought of me. That thought consumed him, poisoned him, until he no longer sought truth or reconciliation. He sought destruction. The first signs of his resolve showed in the world around me. People I barely knew began to treat me differently. The shopkeeper who once allowed me to sweep his floor for bread now refused to meet my eyes. Neighbors who once nodded silently now crossed the street to avoid me. Whispers followed me like shadows, whispers that painted me as dangerous, manipulative, unworthy of even breathing the same air as the innocent child I had come to care for. It was as if he had taken a brush dipped in venom and painted a new version of me, and the world accepted it without question. I wanted to scream, to tell them it wasn't true, that I had never sought this connection, never plotted against him, never claimed her as mine. But my voice was drowned out by his power, and in the silence I could hear the echo of her words. "You're my daddy." That small voice became my only anchor, the only reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the monster he wanted the world to believe I was. And then came the vow. Not whispered in secret, not muttered in rage, but declared with the kind of chilling certainty that makes your blood run cold. I wasn't there when he said it, but I felt it in the way the world shifted around me, in the way his men no longer observed but hunted, in the way fear crept into every corner of my life. He stood before them, his pride bleeding, his empire shaken, his heart poisoned by betrayal, and he promised the one thing he knew he could carry out. "I'll destroy him completely." Those words, simple and sharp, echoed louder than any threat I had ever faced. They weren't the words of a man speaking in anger. They were the words of a man declaring war. And as they carried into the night, I realized the storm had only just begun. Even in poverty, can a man's honor remain unbroken? The day he finally came for me was colder than most. Not in the air, but in the way the world seemed to draw back into silence when he arrived. I was sitting on the edge of the curb, my hands cradling my head, wondering how long I could go on like this, when the sleek hum of an expensive engine echoed down the street. I didn't need to lift my eyes to know who it was. Power has a sound of its own, and I had learned to recognize it long ago. The black car rolled to a stop in front of me, its polished metal reflecting the gray sky. The door opened with quiet precision, and out stepped the man who had vowed to erase me. His shoes struck the pavement like a drumbeat of authority. His suit, tailored to perfection, shimmered faintly in the weak daylight, as though wealth itself clung to his very skin. He stood above me, his shadow stretching long, swallowing mine whole. For a moment he said nothing. He simply looked at me, his expression a mixture of disdain and cold amusement, as though he had already won whatever battle we were about to fight. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, smooth, but every word dripped with venom. "You've caused enough trouble," he said. "My daughter's confusion, her disobedience, her obsession, all because of you. But I am a man who believes every problem has a price, and so does every parasite." With that, he reached into his pocket and drew out a slim leather wallet. From it, he pulled a stack of bills so thick my breath caught in my throat. He didn't hand them to me, not directly. Instead, he let them fall, the wind catching the corners as they fluttered toward the ground in front of me. The green notes scattered on the dirty pavement, glowing like poison in the dim light. "Take it," he ordered. "Take it and disappear. Leave this city, leave my daughter's life, and never show your face again. This is more money than you'll ever see in your pathetic life. It will feed your child. It will give you shelter. It will give you everything you've been begging for. All I ask is that you disappear." The words cut into me like blades. For a moment, my body betrayed me. My eyes lingered on the money, the way it gleamed, the way it promised relief from nights of hunger, from my daughter's empty stomach, from her questions I could no longer answer. My heart pounded with the cruel temptation of it. How many days of food? How many weeks of warmth? How many nights could my little girl sleep without crying from the ache in her belly? But then another thought struck me. What would she see if I picked it up? What kind of father would I be if I allowed my dignity to be bought like a piece of trash? If I sold myself, I would be telling her that her worth, my worth, our lives, could be priced by the man who had already tried to strip me of everything. Slowly, I lifted my head and met his gaze. His eyes, sharp and expectant, waited for me to crawl, to bow, to reach for the money like the beggar he believed me to be. Instead, I drew in a shaking breath and spoke, my voice rough but steady. "My dignity is not for sale." For the first time, his expression shifted. The cold amusement vanished, replaced by a flash of something harsher, anger, disbelief, perhaps even fear that I would not break as easily as he imagined. The silence between us grew heavy, the flutter of the bills on the pavement the only sound in the air. "You fool," he hissed, his composure cracking. "Do you realize what you've just thrown away? That money could have saved you. It could have saved your child. And yet you choose pride." "Yes," I said quietly, my voice trembling but unyielding. "Because when everything else has been stripped from me, pride is all I have left. You think I am nothing. And maybe you are right. But I refuse to let my daughter see me bow to you. She deserves a father who can stand, even if his stomach is empty, even if the world spits in his face. She deserves a man, not a puppet." The words hung between us, sharper than any blade. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me where I sat. But men like him rarely dirty their hands when power can do the work for them. He bent down, gathered the bills with slow, deliberate movements, and tucked them back into his wallet. When he straightened, his eyes were darker than I had ever seen them, a storm gathering behind their cold shine. He leaned closer, his breath hot with fury as he whispered, "You'll regret this. You think dignity can feed a child? You think pride can shelter her? Number. But I can make sure she never eats again. I can make sure you drown in the gutter where you belong." He stepped back, adjusting his suit as though he had not just threatened to destroy my entire life. His face smoothed into calm composure again, but his eyes betrayed him, sharp, ruthless, calculating. And in that moment, I understood something. He had offered me money not as mercy, but as a test. And I had failed his test. Or perhaps in his mind, I had passed it in the worst way possible. Because now, I wasn't just a nuisance to be bought off. I was an enemy to be crushed. He turned to leave, his shoes clicking against the pavement like the tolling of a bell. Before stepping into his car, he glanced over his shoulder, his voice carrying a deadly finality. "If you won't disappear willingly, I'll make sure the world spits you out. I'll paint you as the monster you truly are. And when I'm done, even your own daughter won't look at you without shame." The car door shut with a hollow thud. The engine roared, and in seconds he was gone, leaving behind only the echo of his threat and the shadow of the storm I knew was coming, because I had seen it in his eyes. The plan was already forming. He wouldn't just leave me to rot. He would frame me, bury me under crimes I did not commit, and make sure the world believed every word of it. When the whole world turns against you, calling you a thief and a liar, how does a father prove his innocence? The nightmare began quietly, like a rumor whispered in dark corners, and then it spread like wildfire until my father's entire life was consumed. For more than 2 decades, he had built his reputation with honesty, loyalty, and sacrifice. He had become the kind of man others looked up to, the kind of man whose word was stronger than contracts. Yet all of it was torn away in a single night when the company he had served accused him of embezzlement. According to the charges, he had siphoned off enormous sums of money into hidden accounts, betraying not just the company but everyone who had ever trusted him. The newspapers splashed his face across their pages with the word fraud printed in bold. The television networks dissected his alleged crimes as if they were undeniable fact. Neighbors who once smiled warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. Mothers pulled their children away from our yard as if shame itself was contagious. Society did not simply accuse my father, it crucified him publicly before a trial had even begun. Inside our home, the silence grew heavy and suffocating. My mother tried to stay strong, whispering prayers late into the night, but her trembling hands betrayed her despair. My father, once a man who carried himself with pride, now walked as though the air itself was pressing him down. And me, I was caught between loyalty and doubt, torn apart by the words of the world and the image of the man I thought I knew. I wanted desperately to believe in him, yet the constant headlines and cruel gossip began to poison my mind. Could it be true? Could the man who taught me never to lie, who punished me when I bent the truth, really have deceived so many? That question gnawed at me until one night, during dinner, I made the mistake of looking at him with hesitation in my eyes. He noticed. His fork paused. His voice came low but sharp enough to wound. "Do you believe them too?" I froze. My lips could not form words. My silence betrayed me. And in that silence I saw something inside my father shatter. Tears slid down his cheeks. Not born of anger, but of heartbreak. It was the pain of a man who had fought the world only to find betrayal staring back at him from across his own dinner table. That moment carved a scar in my memory I will never forget. The company produced its evidence. Documents, signatures, and digital transfers that painted my father as the architect of a massive fraud. The records looked flawless, each piece tying neatly to the next, leaving no room for doubt. Reporters hounded us daily, cameras flashing in our faces, while strangers shouted insults at us in the street. The word thief followed us like a curse. Friends stopped answering his calls. Colleagues turned into witnesses against him. Even relatives chose silence over loyalty. My father wasn't just being accused. He was being erased, abandoned, and left to fight alone. In the courtroom, the prosecutors crafted their story with cruel precision. They portrayed him as a greedy man who had lived a double life, twisting his sacrifices into motives and his achievements into tools of deception. Each word chipped away at his humanity, until even I struggled to separate truth from fabrication. Yet something about it all felt wrong. The evidence was too perfect, too convenient, as though someone had carefully designed it to trap him with no escape. My father wasn't falling. He was being framed. Then, just as hope seemed to vanish completely, something unexpected happened. After a grueling court session, when yet another wave of accusations had been hurled at him, we walked slowly down the courthouse steps. That was when she appeared, the CEO's daughter. She moved cautiously, her eyes flicking nervously from side to side, as if she feared the walls themselves might be listening. She leaned toward my father, her voice low and trembling, but filled with urgency. "I know you didn't do it," she whispered. My father's body stiffened, his eyes widening with disbelief. She continued quickly, her words tumbling out before courage left her. "There are documents. Real ones. I found them by accident. They prove someone else is behind all this. My father doesn't know I saw them. If he finds out I told you, I don't know what will happen." Before my father could respond, she pressed a folded note into his hand. Her fingers shook as she released it. Then she slipped back into the crowd, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared. My father stood frozen, the note clutched tightly in his palm. For the first time in months, I saw a spark of life flicker in his eyes. That piece of paper could be the key to everything, the truth that would dismantle the lies and restore his honor. But it could also bring consequences darker than anything we had yet endured. If the truth inside that note pointed toward the wrong person, exposing it could destroy not only the enemy but us as well. Just when every path seemed closed, the CEO's daughter revealed a secret that could either clear my father's name or drag us into even greater ruin. A child's voice can topple the tallest walls of arrogance. The note from the CEO's daughter burned like fire in my father's hand. We could not read it openly, not in the crowded courthouse, not with the eyes of the press circling us like shoo vultures. But the look on his face as he slipped it safely into his pocket was enough to tell me that hope had not vanished completely. For the first time in months, his posture straightened ever so slightly, as if the weight pressing him down had been lifted just enough for him to breathe. That night, when the chaos of the day had subsided, we finally opened the note together. The words were brief, but their meaning was explosive. They spoke of records hidden deep within the company, evidence of secret transactions and shadowy deals that had nothing to do with my father. The CEO's daughter had risked everything to pass it to us, and with it came the possibility of salvation. But it also raised a terrifying question. How long before her father discovered her betrayal? The answer came sooner than any of us expected. The very next day, whispers spread through the courtroom that the CEO himself was coming to testify. His arrival was like the entrance of a king into his castle. Reporters scrambled for position, cameras flashed relentlessly, and the crowd murmured in anticipation. He carried himself with the kind of arrogance only power could grant, dressed in an immaculate suit, his eyes sharp with confidence. To the world, he was the untouchable ruler of his empire. To us, he was the puppeteer holding the strings of my father's downfall. But what no one expected was that his own daughter would stand against him. It happened during a tense moment in court. The lawyers had presented their arguments, the judge listened in heavy silence, and the CEO's testimony was meant to be the nail in my father's coffin. He spoke with rehearsed authority, his words dripping with disdain as he painted my father as a greedy traitor. The crowd nodded along, ready to believe anything from the lips of the man they admired. And then she rose. The CEO's daughter, trembling but determined, stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied with a strength that silenced the room. "Enough," she said, her tone slicing through the air like a blade. The entire courtroom turned to her, their surprise palpable. Her father's eyes widened, his face stiffening in disbelief that his own blood dared to interrupt. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a quiet defiance that shook the walls of that room. "You stand here, speaking of loyalty and honor," she said, her voice growing louder, "but you know the truth as well as I do. He did not steal from you. He did not betray you. You framed an innocent man." The words fell heavy, like stones crashing against glass. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's gavel struck once, calling for order, but her words could not be contained. She stepped closer to her father, her hands clenched at her sides, her face flushed with emotion. And then she spoke the words that would echo far beyond that courtroom. "He is more of a father than you ever were." The silence that followed was deafening. Her voice lingered in the air, carried on the breath of every person present. My father's eyes widened, tears brimming as though those words had reached into the very depths of his broken soul and lifted him up. The room seemed to tilt on its axis as the meaning of her declaration settled over us all. The CEO's face turned crimson. His pride, his authority, his carefully constructed image, all of it had been struck down by the voice of his own child. For a moment, the mask of power slipped, and underneath it was a man consumed by rage. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and his voice, when it finally came, was thick with fury. "You dare speak to me like this?" he thundered. His daughter did not flinch. Her gaze stayed locked on him, steady and unyielding. Her defiance was more dangerous than any evidence she could have presented because it struck at his most vulnerable point: his ego. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing, capturing every second of this unprecedented rebellion. The daughter of the most powerful man in the company, standing in defense of the man he had condemned. It was not just courage, it was a direct assault on the very foundation of his pride. The CEO leaned closer, his voice low but venomous. "If you side with him, you are no daughter of mine." His words dripped with venom, yet she did not retreat. Instead, she lifted her chin and replied with a calmness that carried more weight than his threats. "Then I would rather be his daughter than yours." The room erupted, Some gasped in horror, others in awe. The judge's gavel struck again, calling for silence, but the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. My father looked at her as though she had just pulled him back from the edge of a cliff. My mother, seated beside me, covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears spilling freely. But the CEO was not finished. His pride, once cracked, now shattered completely, and with that came an explosion of wrath. His voice roared through the courtroom, trembling with both fury and humiliation. "You are no longer welcome under my roof," he spat. "If you choose him over me, then get out. From this moment forward, you are nothing to me." The crowd froze, stunned into silence. The threat was not just harsh, it was final. A father disowning his daughter in front of the world. The very arrogance she had struck down now consumed him, twisting his face into something almost unrecognizable. The CEO, furious beyond reason, threatened to throw his own daughter out of the house. And in that moment the line between power and family shattered forever. The fallen man was never weak. He was the reason they survived. The courtroom still trembled with the echo of the CEO's fury, his voice raw with anger as he disowned his own daughter in front of strangers, cameras, and colleagues who once worshipped his every word. He had built his empire on power, on arrogance, on the illusion that he controlled every thread of fate. Yet in that single moment, his authority cracked. For the first time, the world saw not a man of strength, but a man cornered by the truth he had spent years burying. And it was not my father's defense, nor the evidence of his innocence, but the voice of a child, the CEO's own daughter, that struck the deepest wound. But arrogance does not die easily. Even as whispers filled the room, even as journalists scrambled to capture the unprecedented rebellion, the CEO forced himself to stand tall, pretending nothing could pierce his armor. Yet inside him, something had begun to fracture, and that fracture would widen in the silence of the night when no cameras were left to shield him. It was then that the truth he had long denied returned to haunt him, dragging him back to a memory buried so deep he had almost convinced himself it never happened. A memory of a night long ago, when desperation and fear had invaded his home, and the very man he had mocked, the man he now branded a thief, had been the one who saved his world from collapsing. Years earlier, before the empire, before the wealth, when the CEO's power was still in its infancy, his wife had fallen gravely ill. The doctors spoke in measured tones, their voices laced with hesitation, as though each word was a stone too heavy to place upon the family. The medicine required was rare, its price impossibly high for a man who had not yet risen to the heights of fortune. He had sat beside her bed, watching the light fade from her eyes, and for the first time in his life, he had tasted helplessness. It was my father, then dismissed by society as nothing more than a beggar of fate, who stepped forward. He had nothing to his name, no possessions, no wealth, yet he had a heart that carried more strength than any empire. Without hesitation, he sacrificed the one thing he cherished above all else, his chance at happiness. He sold what little future he had secured for himself, gave up the only savings meant for his own dreams, and placed it in the hands of doctors who could save the CEO's wife. And she lived. The woman who later stood at the CEO's side in public appearances, the woman he presented as the jewel of his success, owed her very heartbeat to the sacrifice of the man he would later scorn. But gratitude quickly gave way to pride, and pride silenced the truth. Instead of acknowledging the debt, the CEO buried it beneath layers of arrogance. He convinced himself that he had always been the savior, that his empire was built by his hand alone, that no beggar had ever carried him through the darkest night of his life. Now, standing in the courtroom with his daughter's voice ringing in his ears, that buried truth clawed its way back to the surface. My father, the man the world called a fraud, had once been his silent protector, the very reason his wife had survived, the very reason his family still existed. The weight of that realization pressed on, him like a mountain, forcing him to face the reality he had denied for so long. The courtroom adjourned, but the storm did not leave him. That evening, the CEO retreated to his vast mansion, its walls gleaming with the wealth he had accumulated. Yet all the gold and marble felt hollow. His daughter's words replayed endlessly in his mind. "He is more of a father than you ever were." Each repetition carved deeper wounds into his pride. He poured himself glass after glass of expensive liquor, as though drowning the memory would erase it, but the truth would not be silenced. It rose with every breath, demanding to be acknowledged. He saw his wife's face, pale and fragile, on that hospital bed years ago. He saw my father, standing quietly outside the room, refusing recognition, offering everything he had without asking for anything in return. He remembered the relief of knowing she would live, and the shame of realizing he had been saved not by his own power, but by the selflessness of a man he considered beneath him. Now that same man was in danger of losing everything: his name, his dignity, his freedom. Not because he was guilty, but because the CEO himself had framed him. The arrogance that had shielded him for so long began to feel like a curse. He wanted to crush the thought, to bury it again, but his daughter's face kept appearing before him, her voice unwavering, her courage undeniable. "She chose him over you," the shadows whispered. "And you know why. Because deep down, even she sees the truth you've hidden." The CEO gripped his glass so tightly it shattered in his hand, shards cutting into his skin, but he barely noticed the pain. It was nothing compared to the war raging inside him. For the first time in decades, he questioned whether his empire had been built on strength or cowardice. His daughter knocked on his study door later that night, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to destroy yourself with this lie," she said from the other side. "You don't have to destroy him either. You know what he did for us. You know what you owe him." Her words struck with a force greater than any courtroom declaration, because they came not from defiance, but from love. She was not only defending my father, she was begging her own to let go of the pride that had enslaved him. But pride is a dangerous master. The CEO sat in silence, torn apart by the chains of arrogance that demanded he protect his image, and the quiet voice of love that asked him to finally tell the truth. The night stretched endlessly, his thoughts consumed by visions of the past and the weight of the present. He saw the man he had mocked kneeling by his wife's bedside. He heard his daughter calling him a father unworthy of her love, and he felt the walls of his empire closing in. The CEO spent the night locked in battle with himself, torn between the crushing grip of his pride and the desperate pull of his daughter's love. Out of pain and truth, a new family is born. The night that followed was the longest the CEO had ever endured. He sat alone in his grand study, the walls around him lined with the trophies of his power. Yet all of it felt like nothing more than shadows in the face of truth. Pride had been his shield for decades, but that night pride felt like a prison, each bar forged from the lies he had told and the betrayals he had committed. Sleep never came. Instead, the images returned again and again. His wife's pale face on that hospital bed long ago, my father standing outside with quiet strength, his daughter's tearful eyes declaring that he had never truly been a father to her. By the time the sun rose, he was not the same man who had entered the courtroom the day before. The arrogance in his stride was gone. His suit, though still crisp, no longer looked like armor. For the first time, he carried himself not as a king, but as a man burdened by guilt. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence when he entered, for everyone sensed the shift before he even spoke. Cameras pointed toward him, reporters waiting for the usual fire in his voice. But what came instead was something none had expected. He turned to the judge and to the audience, his voice heavy but steady. "I have lied," he admitted. The words fell like stones, echoing in the room with devastating clarity. The man you call a thief is no thief at all. He was the one who saved my wife's life when I was too weak, too powerless to save her myself. I built my empire on the foundation of her survival, yet I buried the truth of who gave me that chance. I repaid his sacrifice with betrayal. I let my pride destroy him. Gasps rippled through the room, the sound of disbelief and revelation mingling together. Some reporters lowered their pens, stunned into silence. My mother's tears flowed freely beside me, her hands trembling with relief. And my father sat in stillness, his eyes wide, as though every word was chiseling away the chains that had bound him. The CEO stepped forward, his voice cracking under the weight of humility. He turned directly to my father, bowing his head in front of everyone. "You gave me everything," he said. "You gave me my wife's life, my daughter's mother, my family's chance to exist. And I destroyed you to protect my pride. Forgive me, if you can, though I know I do not deserve it." The courtroom had never witnessed such a sight. The most powerful man in the city bowing before the man he had once condemned as worthless. My father rose slowly, his hands trembling, his face wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. "I never asked for thanks," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All I ever wanted was to live in dignity, to raise my child with honesty. You took that from me. But if your words today are true, then let this be the moment when we stop burying truth and start honoring it." The judge struck the gavel, declaring my father innocent of all charges. The forged evidence was ordered to be investigated, the trial collapsing under the weight of the CEO's confession. Reporters rushed to capture the historic reversal, headlines rewriting themselves before our very eyes. My father's name, once dragged through mud, was restored with honor. And yet, what mattered most was not the words of the court, nor the headlines in the papers, but the moment that followed when the CEO's daughter stepped forward. She walked with quiet determination toward my father, her eyes shining with pride. Taking his hand gently, she looked at him with the kind of love no courtroom could measure and said, "You'll always be my daddy." Those words broke the last of the silence. My father, who had endured months of humiliation, who had been branded a criminal by the world, finally wept openly, not in despair, but in relief, in gratitude, in the overwhelming warmth of being recognized not as a thief, but as a father. He pulled her close, holding her as though she were his own, and in that embrace a new family was born, not of blood, but of truth, sacrifice, and love. The CEO watched, his face pale and weary, the weight of his mistakes etched into every line. For the first time in his life, he looked small. Not because he lacked wealth or influence, but because he had been stripped of the illusion that those things could ever matter more than love. His daughter had chosen truth over him, and yet in that choice lay his final chance at redemption. That night, when the lights of the courthouse faded and the reporters carried their stories to the world, the CEO sat once more in his silent mansion. His empire was still intact, his wealth untouched, yet none of it could quiet the questions gnawing at his soul. His pride had nearly destroyed everything: his family, his daughter, an innocent man who had once saved his life. And as he stared into the emptiness of his grand halls, he realized that pride had been his greatest enemy all along. The story leaves us with a haunting question. If a child can recognize truth so easily, why can't adults? If this story touched your heart, imagine how many untold truths remain hidden in the shadows of our world. Don't let this be the last time you uncover them with us. Subscribe now, share your thoughts in the comments, and join me on this journey of stories that test pride, love, and destiny. Your voice keeps these stories alive, so make it heard.